Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. My name is Luke Zimmer. I'm here on behalf of the Council on Undergraduate Research, assisting with technology and Zoom stuff today. If you have any questions about your connection or anything related to Zoom, feel free to send me a private message in the chat there, and I will be happy to help you. And with that, we are recording today's session and making it available to all of our Curr members afterwards. So you'll be able to review this session later on if you'd like to and share it with other folks. You'll get an email after the session with a link to the recording. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Nancy to introduce our presenters today.
Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone for joining us to talk about undergraduate research. And I see a couple people who are participants that were part of this project, and that's great to see you there. Let me introduce, first of all, the speakers that we're going to hear from. Christina Baines is an anthropologist at Gutman Community College. Christina Colon is a biologist from Kingsborough Community College. And Mary Wells Phillips is a biologist from Tulsa Community College, and Jane Weiss is the literature program director from Kingsborough Community College. And I think, as you will see, that we have people representing several different disciplines. So recently I wrote a book called Community Colleges and Undergraduate Research. And I interviewed over 30 professors who were engaged in research in the science, social science, humanities, and the arts. And their work, I think, is particularly interesting because they engage first and second year students in research. And there were 5 different colleges from 5 different states who were involved in this project. So today you'll hear from the 4 faculty who were included in the book. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mary Wells Phillips to begin the first presentation.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I teach biology for majors and non-majors at Tulsa Community College. And at TCC, our course load can range between 72 to 150 students, depending on your course modality or whether or not you teach overload. So that's quite a challenge at times. There are no designated spaces or release time or additional funding for research. In fact, you could see my students there working in the stock room or in the lab after hours. So for the most part, my research activities focus on course embedded research. Students use data mining techniques and go to places like CDC places, or they're involved in citizen science projects such as iNaturalist. We have weekly inquiry-based labs. We evaluate sources throughout the semester, or they are part of an independent research or service learning project. But the focus today is a standalone STEM research challenge course, which is funded by NASA and the TCC Foundation and provides internships at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. And I had to break some barriers myself, and I had to learn to demystify what research was. So I hope this is helpful for people. And my takeaway was that if students were acquiring new knowledge, or they were involved in exploring, investigating, solving problems, they were doing research. And I use the scientific method as my guide. I also learned that regardless of any previous experience or whether students had been involved in research before, all students can do research. It was a learning experience for me to just let them go and let them be creative and resourceful. And I saw that it does promote equity and inclusiveness, and students share their ideas and perspectives. So it's really a fun way to engage students. So really what I want to share is that I attended a professional development much like this one, and Dr. Stockton shared her work in astrobiology at JPL, and I was captivated with the topic. And she said that there was professional development at NASA for faculty, and so that following summer I was there in their micro devices lab. And while I was there, they had community college students doing research at JPL. And they asked me if I wanted to work with them. And I thought, this is great. And then, of course, I asked that $1 million question, how did these students get here? And so with that in mind, and Dr. Stockton's help, I wrangled my faculty friends from chemistry and GIS and engineering and physics and to serve as mentors and develop the first standalone multidisciplinary STEM Research Challenge course. And really, I just want to share that we really did not know what we were doing, especially me. And but the course was a one semester course. We had students from engineering and chemistry and I'm timing myself here, sorry about that. And so that they all worked together on one mission, and that was to come up with a NASA-focused project. The multidisciplinary component piqued the interest of the Oklahoma NASA Space Grant director and asked me to join them on a project undergraduate research grant. And we were thrilled to receive that, which funded many of our internships. So the course was one semester, 16 weeks. It filled every semester. We didn't know how many students would sign up or whether anyone would sign up. And we de-scoped the class so that it was only a proof of concept. The students didn't actually have to do the project, but they had to come up with a proof of concept. They had to flesh it out enough that if we had another semester and had additional funding, that they could do it. And really, it was amazing what the students do, what the students are able to do. Students reached out to universities. They reached out to the community. They were very open-handed with, just how creative and resourceful they were. This group was spending too much money on tardigrades, and I said, you got to find your own. So they sent me a picture that they were tardigrade hunting. So I think it was a lot of fun for them, a lot of fun for us as well. And so you can see by some of the projects here, some of the topics, how resourceful these students were. The course really, we had women, underrepresented students, and our retention every semester was 94 to 100% in the course. Some of the materials that these students wanted were a little bit challenging to get, but you could see that they had fleshed out their projects pretty well. Some of them, most of them, carried out their project. Students pitched their proof of concept to JPL mentors, and I think you could see them smiling here, where they can get to know the students. They would suggest ideas, recommendations, and what to do with their projects. And really, it was an opportunity for them to meet with the students that would eventually be selected to go to JPL for a 10-week internship. At the end of the semester, students actually presented their posters at our TCC Research Day. Some of their projects were accepted to the Oklahoma Research Day. So it was very successful, and the students were very successful. And we learned to just let them go. Just let's see what they come up with. This particular student actually is in my majors class, and they took the Daphnia, the little Daphnia experiment, and I always encourage them to use a NASA-focused idea. And so they added CBD oil and G-forces to the project and submitted it to NCUR, and we presented a couple of years ago when we had our face-to-face conference. The funding provides travel, meal allowance, and lodging, and a $5,000 stipend to JPL, which is really wonderful. The impact is enormous. This student received the Jack Kent Cooke Scholarship. He's working on his PhD right now and became one of TCC notable alumni. Again, more impact I hear from students from time to time, and they're graduated, they're working in the field, which is always wonderful. As they're part of their internship, many of them were asked to come back, and they the following summer or in the fall. and JPL would then pay for their internship, which was fabulous. And we had several authors, published authors with their mentors, which was incredible. Part of the grant allowed for professional development, just similar to what I experienced. And we were able to visit students with their mentors at JPL. We learned so much from their research projects, and really, we all had a wonderful, wonderful time. I am glad to announce that we've had a 2-year hiatus, but this summer we're sending Jessie to JPL to work on identifying life in extreme environments. And Jalen will be going to Johnson Space Center, and Antonia has 2 research opportunities there, Boeing and Armstrong Flight Center. So I just want to share real quick what happened to the STEM Research Challenge course. Well, about the time that our funding ended, Pathways, I don't know if you're familiar with Pathways at your college, but students are not able to take any courses that are not part of their course. So any 1-hour credit courses that are not part of a pathway were really discouraged. So I think they're evaluating that right now, whether or not we should offer these courses or not. I just want to mention real quick that to have your students apply to the Barry Goldwater Scholarship, that's a STEM scholarship. It is for community college. I learned about that at NCUR, one of the conferences. So we had our first winner in 2020. The National Science Foundation also has opportunities for students to submit their research. And we were fortunate to be one of the 10 top teams, and even received a little governor's commendation. If you're not familiar with NASA Community College, Aerospace Scholars is for everyone, biologists, humanities. They really accept just a multitude of students into their programs, and students are able to, again, do their own research, participate in other programs. Cavian is now working at NASA headquarters. Haley was our last intern in 2019. So with that, I want to thank you and be mindful of my time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me.
Thank you, Mary. And I just want to add one thing. Oklahoma is known for having a statewide undergraduate research day. And all the campuses in the state are invited to have students present at it. And it's a really great opportunity for students. So let's move on to Christina Colon.
Thank you. I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Christina Colon. I am a faculty in the Department of Biological Sciences at Kingsborough Community College in Brooklyn, New York. And I am an ecologist. So I study critters in the field rather than in the lab. Okay, so I wanted to just emphasize the fact that my research is a collaboration, in part because that's how ecologists do it, and in part because we, as a community college, as you probably already know, have very limited funding and are always looking for ways to join forces with other institutions who can help support us and who we can help support. So that's why you see all these names here. Next slide. So one of the things that all ecologists know is that they have to find a really super sexy species for their research so that people will really want to get in on field work. And I can't think of a more appealing animal than the American horseshoe crab. There's a female here with her entourage of males, and they come ashore to spawn every spring, and their frequency and their predictability and the locations are really truly predictable. So it's a great study animal when you have to adhere to an academic schedule because the crabs will be there at the right time in the right place. Next slide. The other thing that's really remarkable about these animals is that they are part of a billion-dollar industry with a product derived from their blood. I don't know if you can see, some of their blood is blue, and that blue blood is used to test for bacterial contamination of surgical equipment in hospitals and medical institutions worldwide. The crabs are not killed, but they are used, bled, and then released into the wild. So humans rely on this animal for our very survival. Next slide. And so luckily for me, I live in New York, I work in Brooklyn, and this is one of the places in the entire state that is a prime spawning beach for horseshoe crabs. And so my campus is so close to the spawning beach that I have requested a jet ski. I haven't gotten a budget for a jet ski yet, but a 5-minute jet ski would take me to my research site. But proximity to a field site is also really important when you don't have a big budget. And so we can get there super fast. Next slide. So this is my field work, and this is my lab, and these are my students. And I'm the one sitting off by myself, letting my students do the problem solving and figure out, I give them directions, and then they figure out how to complete the task. And I found that that works way better than me micromanaging. As soon as I start to speak, all of their hands drop to their sides and they all stop talking and they all become these little passive robots. But if I just say, lay out a grid, make it this big, put it halfway up the beach, sample, within that grid, all of a sudden they're problem solving and they become rock stars in the field. So this is a lesson that took me a while to learn, but now I just sit quietly on the side. Next slide. My field work is also super inexpensive, which is another big ticket item for anybody doing work at a community college. We don't have a big budget, so I go out into the field with students and give them the most basic of equipment like rubber mallets and plastic baggies and clipboards, and they can accomplish so much with this. And if anything gets lost in the field or broken, or a rubber mallet accidentally breaks, it's not going to stop my field work. So having that low tech, low cost protocol is a real winner when you're at the community college level, and when you're handing it off to these students who may or may not know how to handle a rubber mallet and a PVC pipe. If they break it, it's okay. Next slide. And many of the students have really never explored outside of their own beaten path or their own little community. Plum Beach is right off the campus. You can see my campus in the background, but these students have never gotten there for a variety of reasons, in part because parks are not things or places that people in urban landscapes often go to. Many of them are told to stay away from those places. It's where bad things happen. And community service has a negative connotation. And so if I say we're going to go do citizen science, or we're going to go help on a research project and do a volunteer project, many of them associate that with punishment or, some kind of corrective behavior. So I think the fact that students see us doing this field work on a volunteer basis, they start to see it in a new light. And then also picking up one of these animals, handling these crabs once they learn a little bit about them. I learned from my years working at the zoo that you can change a life by just letting them have that interaction with an animal. Next slide. When I started out doing field work at Kingsborough, I worked with a small cohort of students, and they were my summer research students on a grant. They got funding to go in the field. It was all very good. But very quickly, I learned that the more students I got into the field, the more I could accomplish. And so I just started taking entire classes out. If I had an ecology class of 25 students, all of them go into the field. All of them get that hands-on, firsthand understanding of doing science. And it makes my life easier because I don't have to plan some phony baloney lab, and I get all of my field work done in half the time. Next slide. And so my students would all step up, literally up to their shins in water, and start doing all of this amazing field work. And each of them could contribute a unique element of this longer term, broader scientific study by focusing on one aspect. And so many of them would become co-authors on papers, or become contributors to data sets that go on to promote long-term monitoring and conservation protocols of these animals. I'll just go on to the next slide. even in the lab, when we go back into our lab situation, our labs usually don't have a lot of technical equipment. We have the benches, we have the water, we have the basic equipment, but we don't have anything high tech. So that too is why finding an organism that you can work with in the lab using basically cafeteria trays and Metro cards is really, really effective for large groups of students to get a whole lot out of it. Also, my data is very robust. And what I mean by that is they're counting thousands and thousands of eggs. If they're off by 10 or 11 or 12 or 20, it's not going to ruin the data set. I have them double check each other. I have them pass the tray to the next student so they can cross-reference their numbers. But honestly, if there's a mistake made, it's okay. My data is super robust and it won't harm the data. Next slide. And I even have students who return after a year and they mentor the other group. That leadership, that peer mentorship allows them to take on a new role and allows them to grow as scientists, because now they're acting like a supervisor. They're giving instructions and they are supervising their peers. And so that's something I bake into all of my research, all of my semesters. Even now, when I have a class of students, none of whom have done research, I make them check each other's work. And that is the leadership role that allows them to grow into the position of scientist. Next slide. Like I mentioned before, collaboration is super important. I have the field, I have the crabs, I have the students, and I have the knowledge of working with this animal, but many other community colleges or four-year colleges have the labs, they have the grants, they have the sequencers. So bringing that all together is super important. And I've learned over time that many grants want a community college partner. And so that's given us an entree into the four-year experience for not only my research, but also my students. Next slide. And so this is, one group of students, and I have so far, processed literally hundreds of students. All of them get civic engagement credit. All of them become citizen scientists, not just sort of in a theoretical way, but because they have worked on an IUCN horseshoe crab research project that is nationwide and part of a global effort to protect these animals. So this kind of field work with undergrads has become so entrenched for me that I've abandoned all my labs completely that are sort of cookbook labs in a classroom, and everything they do is collecting original data and part of a citizen science project. Next slide. So just for example, we do camera trapping as part of a wildlife monitoring program, and a lot of the data ends up online and it has to be coded by citizen scientists. And so anything they do in their lab, and we do this in a computer lab, contributes to that research project. Next slide. iNaturalist was mentioned earlier. I won't talk too much about it, but this too, students don't realize right in New York City, you can put in red fox, you can put in chipmunk, and you can see every sighting of these animals in your own burrow, in your own backyard. And this is also just life-changing for students. They might not touch the animal and see it, but they know that there was one right in their own park. And that just makes them take ownership of their own landscape, their own community, and their own role in protecting that community. Next slide. And so many of the students will do additional research, and all of the data that we collect goes onto a database. So DNA sequences, photos, we're going to have bird call data and coyote call data coming up. It will be there forever. So they can go back to that data set anytime. If they do a master's thesis, they can work on the same data that they did as an undergrad or as a community college student and make a broader contribution. And next slide. And finally, one of the things that I've also moved away from is cookbook, not just cookbook labs, but cookbook textbooks, cookbook lab manuals. I have all my students work with the primary literature, and this too has allowed them to become not just understanding the concepts, but applying those to real world research and seeing how scientists collect data, report data, and contribute to our understanding. And I do that step by step, word by word. Their first job is to tell me the last name of the lead author, and they often just don't know where to look, but they get it, and they actually do such a wonderful job. So I think on that slide, I think that is my last slide. And I think on that note, I will wrap it up.
Thank you, Christina. So let's move on to Jane Weiss. Jane.
Okay,
Oh, there you are.
now let's see if I can share screen. Wait, I didn't do it right.
Did you send it to Luke? You want him to do it?
I did, and I would really appreciate it if, Luke, if you could do it, I'd be much happier.
One moment here,
Do you
Jane.
have it?
Okay,
There we
there we
go.
go.
Okay. So to start. So, is there a slide before that? I think, yeah, there we go. That's my introduction. Okay, now we can move on to the next slide. Hi, I'm Jane Weiss. I teach in the English department at Kingsborough Community College. I'm a colleague of Christina's, and I'm in the English department. So I'll talk a little bit about how that's different. But first, I'd like to talk about Cuny itself and something unique, I think, about City University of New York. And that's that the community colleges are fully integrated into Cuny's mission as a research university. Tenure track and tenured faculty at the community colleges are expected to engage in research and publication in the disciplines in which they teach in their fields of specialty. And this policy, which was established, about 25 years ago, maybe a bit earlier, has a dual purpose. One aspect of it is that students at the community college level are expected to be, are taught by publishing scholars, just as students at senior colleges expect. And the assumption is that faculty members' research will inform and invigorate their teaching. But there's an even more important and more radical purpose to this. And that follows from what Christina was saying. Christina implied this. And that is that scholarship in academic fields benefits when it's not the province of some small, rarefied few. Scholarship benefits when it is not only done by the big people at the flagship campuses. Academic disciplines benefit when a broader and more diverse base of scholars have a say in the content and approaches in the field, not only how we teach, but what we teach. And that's the profound part of student scholarship too. I mean, sure, it's great that they gain confidence. It's great that they're getting more skilled in their fields, but students can also make genuine contributions in these fields. Next slide, please. The situation in literary studies is interesting in that in the whole field at the college level, it's the professional norm in the field, in the discipline, for students to be doing some original work very early on. It's rare in literary studies at any college level for students to use textbooks. Textbooks as opposed to literary works as the primary, literary texts as the primary sources. And fellow students' interpretations of published academic scholarship, peer-reviewed scholarship as the secondary sources. And it's unheard of at a university level for faculty, for any faculty, to represent a single right interpretation. And that is just not the norm in literary studies. What literary studies does, what interpretation, is that interpretations compete. In literary studies, a scholar argues her interpretation, and what literary studies does as a discipline is it provides concepts, vocabulary, methodologies for analysis. And so students begin to do this very early, even in their first literature courses at college level, throughout literary studies. I teach American literature from the early 1800s through the early 1900s, with a few later texts sometimes sneaking in. And so meanings and interpretations are fraught, they're controversial, they're political. Next slide, please. So getting to the pro level, of course, is a long way away for most undergraduate literature students. There is very little infrastructure in literary studies, few conferences, and zero funding as far as I can think of. I mean, zero hard money kinds of funding for undergraduate literary studies. It's just not funded nationally or regionally the way STEM is, and there's no business community support for it. There are still some wonderful intermediate steps that we can do, ways that students can publish their scholarship, even without that structure. Course discussion sites, asking students to share and show and discuss each other's interpretations, written interpretations and analyses through course management systems is one. They're a fine first step. They resemble scholarly listservs and bulletin boards. They help students move beyond that dead end writing of a paper that's meant only for the professor. Students can learn to reference and cite one another's discussion posts. And I have ended up citing students' work in my own conference presentations, not so much in my published work yet, unless I count a student who then became a colleague, but in conference presentations, yes, I've referenced and cited student interpretations that I found insightful, that gave me information I hadn't had. I also, next slide, please. Also want to mention in 2019, Cuny held a community college students English symposium. It was hosted at LaGuardia Community College and involved representatives from three Cuny community colleges. They presented, actually, next slide, my final slide. We had three from each community college. They presented their papers, and then we had a discussion session, and it was a wonderful chance to do literary scholarship in a professional way. We haven't had it since 2019 because of COVID, but we're hoping to resume it. So I'd like to finish just by saying that as with citizen science, in literary studies, we can recognize students' abilities to inform us and change our interpretations of works of literature, not in the cliche, I learned from my students, but in the same way we learn from other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. And let's move on to Christina Baines. And do you want Luke? Go ahead.
Oh, I think I can do the share. If
Okay.
No. Thank you so much, Nancy, and to Mary and Christina and Jane for their great work and for highlighting this. How does this look to everybody? Are we good? Yes?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So I just wanted to go through, I teach at Gutman Community College. And before I get into the details of Gutman, I just wanted to give a few kind of points about like why we do this work. And I want to shout out to Jane and Christina and Mary, who all brought up some of these points in their different ways. And it's not easy, right, to work with early career scholars, right, with undergraduates at community colleges. Because a lot of times, like you're teaching the basics of research and also kind of relying on students to be part of this research. So why do we do it? For me personally, community engagement is very important, and this is part of a way of engaging the community and teaching students that engaging their community through on-the-ground research is important. I find the research experiences, just like all my colleagues just told you, are personally and professionally transformative, both for the students, but also for me. Life lessons in the research process that the students learn are so impactful, right? You know, that you don't just learn how to do research, right? But you learn how to think critically about the world that you live in. So I think that that's so important. I'm sorry, my cat, of course, has arrived. Welcome to Zoom Life. And the lesson, educational equity is important to me. And I think that you know, a lot of times students at community college, their professors can't offer these research experiences. And so I think that it's important for equity to offer these. And I get to share a more holistic part of myself, which I think is really important. I think that, you know, students learn about my research through conducting their own research. And I think that they understand me more deeply as a teacher scholar. Shout out to Jackie Alvarez. You see her presenting at the Cuny Diversity and Inclusion Conference. She was an unlikely participant in research. I did a research interview with her mother, and she started to get really interested in why I would be interested in her family. She's from a Mixtec family from Puebla in Mexico. And she was like, why would my professor want to talk to my mom? And then she really got interested in her heritage. And that's one of these ways that the research was transformative for her in her life and not just in her scholarly career. This is a similar presentation at the community college meeting or conference with Kiara Taylor, who is sharing her research. She worked with me on one of my projects with the Garifuna Belizean community in Brooklyn, and they're thinking about heritage and as it related to health. And Jane mentioned many of these things. Cuny is this unique place, right, where we have university research requirements, but we teach at a community college with a heavy teaching load. So how are we going to do that, right? And I was lucky at Gutman because our experiential learning and innovative pedagogies kind of encouraged me to sort of incorporate students into my research as part of their experiential learning and their undergraduate research. All right, so Gutman is a CUNY college. This is the newest CUNY community college, and we have a prescriptive first-year experience where all students must take a series of courses in their freshman year. And two of these courses, one being Ethnographies of Work, the other, it was formerly City Seminar. This year it's changed to a series, American Studies series on Introduction to Social Justice. And in both of those courses, students participate in their own research, in their own original research. So in Ethnographies of Work, they learn about research skills. These are ethnographic research skills. I'm a social scientist, so these skills include participant observation, interviewing, taking field notes, coding, analysis, writing, and then they go into a workplace that's interesting to them, and they apply their ethnographic research skills to write about that workplace through the lens of the research process and collecting data that way. City Similarly, it's an interdisciplinary course. It remains interdisciplinary now that it's Introduction to Social Justice. So students, a social scientist works with a quantitative person, a math professor, and students do research. These are some examples of portfolios, which are like web blogs that students have made to share the data from both the qualitative and quantitative side. Students did a bodega inventory, what foods were, it's a food justice themed seminar, and students were looking at what foods were available in the different bodegas, and then they had to interview someone in their families about a recipe, and so they were looking at quantifying the types and varieties of foods available and how that related to the recipes that they gathered and the positionality of their families as it related to the food justice conversation. So the ethnographies of work class I just mentioned, we didn't like any of the ethnography textbooks because usually we don't get ethnographic research methods until graduate school as social scientists. Usually we're just taught content, and then in graduate school, it's like, okay, now you can do the research. And so the textbooks weren't really appropriate for our students. So we wrote a textbook together. It's available at this link here, and I can make these slides available in the chat so you can catch the links. But this is it's a textbook on Cuny manifold. It's open source. And my chapter is Thinking Like an Ethnographer. And this is something that I share with all my students because I think it's so important to do ethnographic research, independent ethnographic research, but also a skill for life, right? So students are learning how to observe details of culture without passing judgment, right? Researchers don't judge what they're researching, they document what they're researching, to practice cultural relativism, so not to judge social behavior based on their own opinions, but on what exactly is happening, and the qualities of empathy, humility, openness, curiosity. An opportunity that exists at Cuny for the community colleges is wonderful, that a lot of my students have participated in, is the Cuny Research Scholars Program. So a lot of times what happens in my sort of undergraduate research trajectory at Gutman is students participate in the first year courses and find out that they like doing research. And then they hear about the Research Scholars Program, which is coordinated by a chemist at Gutman, Chelsung Kim, and they sort of apply to be part of the program. So they meet together as a cohort, and it's interdisciplinary research, right? It's typically science and social science together, and then they meet with their mentors one-on-one and design independent research projects, and they collect them, and they go all the way through to the presentation stage, right? So we guide them through the analysis to the presentation, and the presentations are Cuny-wide. So they could come together, and it gives them a really great opportunity to develop their own research, to capitalize on, that they like to do research and they want to do this. It's a paid program. They get a stipend for participating, so they can treat it like a job. They can devote the time to it that it takes to really do this kind of research from start to finish. And for the remaining slides, I just have a few different examples of some programs that my students have participated in that relate to their research. This was the Pressing Public Issues program for community college professors across Cuny, and it was co-hosted by the James Gallery, the Graduate Center, the Teaching and Learning Center, and the Cuny Humanities Alliance. And my students in their environmental ethics class did research into environmental activism, and then they created these posters based on their original research in how people had conducted activism or expressed activist language. And then we created a zine that distributed the data that they collected throughout the boroughs, right, for people that may not have been able to come to the exhibition at the James Gallery. So that was a pretty cool event. And speaking of cool, I co-direct a organization called Cool Anthropology. It's like a collective of academics and artists and community members. And we've had a couple of projects that students have worked on. They've done the background research they've done research in real time at these different live events. And you see some students collecting data on the left. They're collecting data through a pile sort process, which is a cognitive research method where they look at how participants put terms together. And then the Shifting Stereotypes project is it looks at how power and language come together. And so Shanice in the center on the right picture, she was a CUNY research scholar, and she was chosen to represent Gutman at the conference, and she researched microaggressions. So she looked into experiences of microaggressions and interviews around those. We also have Ethnography Matters. That's another one of the projects of co-anthropology. And Hania Delgado was a student at Gutman. She was actually not a social scientist or a scientist and doing research, but she was a business student, and she went on to Baruch to become a social media manager. We were able to hire her through a fellowship that I got, but she actually ended up doing research, right? She ended up looking to make these social media memes where we highlighted different ethnographers as part of this project. She had to do research into the work of these different ethnographers. So she was reading anthropology and like looking at academic papers to see who we should feature and quotes that we should highlight. So this is sort of research in a different kind of way with students. The program is kind of on hiatus with COVID and everything, but in Gutman, we have a program called Global Gutman, and I took a group of students to Belize, and they were conducting ethnography in Belize. And on the far right, you can't really see, but the students had to do a journal reflection. And one of the students on this page that was published in another stylist book, like Nancy's book, about how ethnography was there. What they learned about themselves was they loved ethnography. They loved the ethnographic process. And then one of the students, Tazreen, she came back to me one-on-one in Belize as part of her CUNY Research Scholars Program research, and she did ethnographic mapping and ethnographic interviews, and you see her here doing those two things with the community to think about how they conceptualized happiness. And finally, a current project that I'm working with Jaylyn, who's currently a student at Hunter. So she graduated. One of the great things about this work is that students, it's kind of sad at community colleges because sometimes we only see students for a couple of classes for a couple of years and then they move on. But I think that several of my students have sort of stayed in touch and wanted to continue their research projects. And Jaylyn is one of those. She took a class with me, Introduction to Urban Community Health, where students did some research on defining health in different communities during COVID. And one of the things they did was contribute to a research project called the Pandemic Journaling Project. And what Jaylyn did was she continued the project as a CRISP scholar and now at Hunter, where she looked at how the New York City Department of Health media messages are, she calls them colonized, how they don't take into account immigrant health perspectives when they're talking about their messaging. And this is one of her early iterations of her poster where she was trying to interview people more in depth. So she did sort of a media analysis and combined with interviews and coded both of those together to come up with her project. So one of the things she found out, like on the left, the very left, give yourself a break. She's like, well, there's many community members in New York that can't give themselves a break. They would love to give themselves a break, but actually they have 3 jobs that they need to survive. So she made a very powerful presentation about this work, and she continues to do this work. I wanted to thank you all so much. I think that Nancy will guide us in a few questions. Please stay in touch. Thank you all.
Thank you. And Luke, are they sending questions to you or can I see them on my computer?
Any questions in the chat, you should be able to see them there.
Okay. So let me ask you then, if you have questions, to put them into the chat. And while I'm waiting for them to show up, a couple of things. One question was, can we get a list of resources? And yes, you can. If you send me an email, my email address is my last name, Hensel, HENSEL.Nancy@gmail.com. I will make sure we get you the information that you requested. I'd like to just provide a sort of a brief summary. I think several mentioned equity, and equity is really important in community college work. And I think it's really important for students who are attending community colleges to be prepared for their future career or prepared for transfer to four-year college. And undergraduate research is one of the best ways to do that. I think what you've also learned is that the community can be an important part about finding ways to do undergraduate research with students. And it's also a way that you can engage students in a cost-effective way. And I hope you've seen with the variety of, science and literature and social science that undergraduate research can be done in all disciplines. It's different ways, but it can be done. And as several of our presenters said, it does support degree completion and also the transfer to four-year colleges. So let me open it up for any questions that you might have, and let me check and see what's on the chat. Okay, one question is, does anyone have a solution to the transfer guided pathways issue? That's a really important issue that Mary mentioned, that I know several systems are limiting the choice that students have because of guided pathways, which does have advantages that students can see a way to graduation, and that's important. So I don't know if any one of you want to answer that question. Christina, one of the Christinas maybe, have you dealt with that at the Cuny system, or Jane?
I can just say that Carla Fuller is a biologist at Gutman, and she has a lot of innovative classes and unique student research, and then she works very closely with Pathways, and we just got a Pathways designation for a class called Science and Society. It's a new class. And I think that if people want to understand the nuts and bolts of that, I can't provide that here, but I could provide you with Carla's information, because I think she would be a really incredible resource. And a class like Science and Society seems like something that could work for everybody's kind of embedding research, and it is a Pathways course at Gutman. So
yeah, and that's an important point, and I should have mentioned it. And then in the question says, what do you think is driving this trend? Why are they seeking out community college students specifically? But I think course-based research is one way. If you I guess I was reading from a different question, but anyway, course-based research is one of the ways that you can include research in any course that you're teaching, just about any course. And so it doesn't have to be a separate research course. It can be research embedded. So the next question was, two presenters mentioned that both federal research labs and are specifically seeking out community college students. Why do we think this is a trend, and why are they seeking out community college specifically? Do you want to answer that one, maybe any of you?
I'll jump in and just say that I think it's part of a larger push to get inclusion and equity. And I think they're realizing that the sooner you get students started doing research, the more likely they will be to go on to a career in research.
Yeah, I'd add to that. One of the things I've heard from community college faculty is that, except for Cuny, the publishing situation is different generally at community colleges. And so community college faculty can take more risks in the research that they do with students. And I think that may be another reason why they're looking at community colleges. And community colleges, I don't know if this is still true today, but in the past, they've been more flexible in making changes in their curriculum. At least I think in California, that's been, and where I used to work in Maine was the case. So let's see. Another question, could we hear a little more about how you were able to get paid stipends at Gutman for 7 to 10 students? Scholars program is a great idea. Christina, Baines, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, it's a program through the Office of Research at Cuny Central. So each campus is given a budget, and a budget for materials, and also a budget for student stipends. So it all goes through, it's coordinated on each campus, but it goes through the Cuny Office of Research. So Ron Nario, I think, is the contact for that program at Cuny. And maybe he'd be able to share more details about how to export that program I'm not sure if it's internal or external, or how the Office of Research funds that particular program, but it's a game changer for sure.
And another question about funding sources for non-academic affiliated research programs for community college students. And I don't know if anyone has, found other sources other than NSF and NEH and stuff for, sometimes local historical societies, local businesses. When I was the president of a university, we got some funding from the local Chamber of Commerce, I believe it was, to do research on in business. What did students want to see in businesses in a small rural community? So I don't know, you just have to, I think, be creative in thinking about what are the resources in your community and asking them if they can help out. But I'm not sure if that exactly answered the question. Another question, does anyone else have a problem with universities not accepting foundational methodology courses for transfer because they want to teach those courses themselves? Does anybody want to respond to that?
I can speak a little bit to that because as we work out articulation agreements with the main college to which the college to which the largest section of our students transfer, Brooklyn College, which is another Cuny college, specifically for English majors, we do run into that. In fact, the main big methodology courses for majors at Brooklyn College are 4-hour courses, and ours are 3-hour, 3-credit courses. And so Brooklyn has actually asked us not to replicate that here. What we worked out, what we negotiated, is that it's fine for students at Brooklyn to take those as juniors. It's not critical for them to take them first. That's a quirky arrangement, but it's what the department there has agreed on. And they do then accept our literature electives as the equivalent electives. So perhaps just because of the nature of literary studies, they didn't feel that the big, historical Beowulf to the present courses had to be done before students could engage in real literary scholarship. I doubt that would work for firm sciences, but maybe in some social science fields it could, maybe even in some science fields.
I'm going to, when I was the president of a university, this was one of the issues that we had, that our faculty at the 4-year campus did not want to bring the courses in from the local 2-year. And we arranged a lot of meetings between departments so faculty could talk with each other and learn what was going on in the courses. And that was one of the things that helped. But we have somebody who's a real expert also on undergraduate research at community colleges who's participating. That's Jim Hewlett. Jim, I think you're still on.
I'm still here.
And I don't know if you have, because Jim Hewlett is what is your title? The director anyway of the community college, Community College Undergraduate Research Initiative, if I got that right.
Yep.
Anyway, he's done great work with community colleges and supporting research, particularly in the sciences. But I don't know if you have any ideas for that last question.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because this is the one about getting the 4 universities to take the work, basically. And I think that one of the issues that this issue is basically system-based. So like in SUNY, for example, right, that they're mandated to take, so it's seamless transfer is mandated. So they're mandated to take everything.
It is in California too.
Yeah, so in our network, we do work in states where the community colleges aren't even in their own, they're not even in a system together, so let alone connected to the 4-year institution. So that makes it hard. So I don't think there's a solution to it other than what you just said, which is really just getting the people together and making sure that they understand what's happening in the classroom, and that they can see the value behind it. I think that's probably the best way.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the points that I wanted to make in the book that I wrote, is that community colleges are really doing great work. And there's no reason why those courses should not be transferable. But four-year faculty need to know about the great work that community colleges are doing. And I think we've run out of time. There's one other comment here, and this is for you, Lindsay, I think. Jackie Swanek said she would like to see some kind of listserv or group together for ongoing conversations on these topics. So maybe that's something that Kerr can think about. I want to thank all of you for participating. We really appreciate your interest in community college undergraduate research. And I want to thank the two Christinas, and Jane and Mary, for being the presenters, and Kerr and Luke for his technological assistance, which we needed, and Kerr for allowing us to do this webinar. So thank you very much. And I hope to hear from you if you have more questions. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That concludes our session for today. A recording of today's session will be available in the Kerr community after we get that prepared and edited there. In the meantime, you are more than welcome to continue the conversation in the Kerr community there. If you're a current Kerr member, you can access the discussion boards and continue sharing ideas and thoughts. In the meantime, we will make sure to email everyone when there's a copy of the presentation available so that you can share it. So thank you all so much, Nancy, and all of the crew, for your presentations today. We appreciate it.
Thanks.